Have you ever wondered if there's a way to win in the market without trying to predict the future? What if I told you that instead of acting like some kind of fortune teller, you could act like a professional card counter? Not by guessing the next card, but by knowing with mathematical certainty when the odds are stacked in your favor. Well, that's the whole idea behind a strategy called V4.5, and today we're going to break down exactly how it works. See, most of us are taught that investing is all about prediction, trying to guess where a stock or the market is headed next. But this strategy, V4.5, it just flips that whole idea on its head. It argues that the real, sustainable edge comes from probability. It's not about knowing what will happen. It's about knowing the statistical likelihood of what could happen, and only, and I mean only, placing your bet when those odds are good. So that brings us right to our first big concept, this idea of winning without having to predict anything. And it's not about having some secret crystal ball, it's about having a system to identify when the conditions are just right.
And this, right here, just brilliantly illustrates the difference in mindset. The average investor is constantly trying to guess the next move, which, let's be honest, is an exhausting and usually a losing game. But the professional, they're like a card counter. They just wait, patiently. They get that most of the time the house, or in our case, the market, has the edge. So their job isn't to play every single hand. It's to wait for those rare moments when the game is mathematically tilted in their favor, and only then do they act.
Now, to really get this, we need to understand the card counter's secret. And trust me, it's not what you've seen in the movies. This right here probably dispels the biggest myth out there. A professional card counter isn't some frantic gambler throwing chips around. Nope, they spend the vast majority of their time placing minimum bets, just observing and tracking the cards. Their main job is just waiting for the right moment. They are disciplined observers first and bettors a distant second. And here's their entire process, boiled down to 3 simple steps. First, they measure the state of the game. They're keeping that mental count of high versus low cards. Second, they wait. They do absolutely nothing until that count tells them the deck is hot, full of high cards. And third, only then do they bet with discipline, upping their bet size to press that advantage. Measure, wait, bet. That's it. So the crucial point is this. The card counter has no clue if the next card is a king or a 3, and they don't need to know. Their whole edge comes from knowing that the remaining cards are more likely to be good for them. They're playing a statistical game based on the current state of the deck, not a guessing game about the very next card. So how does this all translate to the market? I mean, blackjack is one thing, but how do we apply this card counter's method to trading? How do we learn to read the market's deck? Well, the answer is the VIX index. You've probably heard it called the fear gauge. All it does is measure the market's expectation of volatility over the next 30 days. And for the V4.5 strategy, the VIX is our count. It's the one number that tells us the composition of the market's deck, whether conditions are favorable for us, unfavorable, or just neutral. And this table here makes the analogy crystal clear. In blackjack, the deck is the set of cards. For us, it's market volatility. The count in blackjack is, well, the count. For us, it's the VIX index. A hot deck, that signal to bet, is when the VIX is in a very specific range, mostly between 17 and 19. Waiting is just when the strategy is in a neutral state with no trade on. And finally, placing a bet means we execute a very specific trade, selling a put spread on the SPY ETF.
Okay. So now that we have the framework, let's get into the exact mechanical rules of the V4.5 strategy. There's no guesswork here. It's all about strict, non-negotiable conditions.
Entry is absolutely everything. The strategy only acts if the VIX is in one of 2 zones. The primary zone, that's the real sweet spot, is a VIX between 17 and 19. That is our hot deck. There's also a secondary zone up to a VIX of 30, but, and this is a critical rule, a trade is only placed if volatility is actively falling. This keeps you from jumping into a market that's in the middle of blowing up.
So what's the actual bet? Well, it's not a guess on whether the market will go up or down. It's what's called a short put spread on the SPY, which is a big ETF. This is an options trade that's designed to make money from 2 things: time passing and volatility staying stable or falling. It's a bet on the conditions, not the direction.
Getting in is only half the battle, right? Knowing when to get out is just as important. And this strategy is not greedy. The vast majority of trades, we're talking 95% according to the data, are closed way before they expire, right after they've captured between 55 and 60% of their potential profit. It's like the card counter, walking away from the table once they've cashed in their winnings from a hot deck.
Of course, no strategy wins 100% of the time. So how does V4.5 handle the inevitable losing trade? This is where its design gets really clever. Okay, so first, the strategy has no traditional stop loss. I know that sounds risky, but it's a very deliberate choice. Think about it. For a strategy that's betting against volatility, a sudden panic spike can trigger a stop loss at the worst possible moment, sometimes right before things calm down. Using a stop loss here would be like a card counter freaking out and leaving a hot table just because the dealer showed one good card. Risk is managed up front at entry, not by reacting in the middle of the trade.
So what does it do instead? It builds protection into every single trade. As this chart shows, about 22% of the money you collect from every trade is immediately set aside to pay for hedge. This isn't an afterthought, it's a structural cost of doing business. It makes sure that protection is always in place, no matter what.
And that hedge has a very specific trigger. It only activates if the VIX spikes by 35% or more from where it was when you put the trade on. This is your black swan protection, and it absolutely works. The audited data shows a real-world example where a potential $8,000 loss was turned into just a $2,800 loss because the hedge kicked in exactly as it was designed to.
All right, all these rules and analogies sound great, but what are the results? What actually happens when you follow this? Let's look at the audited performance of this disciplined, probabilistic approach from 2020 to 2025.
First, the headline number. Over a 6-year period that had some seriously wild market swings, the strategy won on 96.5% of its trades. That's 55 wins out of 57 total trades. Pretty incredible.
And the average profit on those 55 winning trades? Over $4,000. So this shows the strategy is consistently able to capture that statistical edge it was designed to find.
But this, to me, is the most important number on the screen. The single worst loss the strategy ever took was just over $2,800. So think about that. The average win is significantly larger than the worst loss. That's called positive asymmetry, and it is the absolute holy grail of risk management.
And here's the full picture for those who want all the details. You can see the total profit, that super high win rate, and that key metric down at the bottom, 0 widowmaker trades. Those are the catastrophic losses that just wipe people out. The built-in hedge has successfully prevented any kind of disaster like that.
We'll end with this thought because it perfectly captures the whole essence of the V4.5 strategy. It's not about the thrill of being in the market every single day. It's about the discipline of waiting for a specific, measurable opportunity and then acting on it without emotion. Really, it's the difference between gambling and truly playing the odds.